talking about Peter Baker, who was the first owner of the car, and I believe the second owner of the car was also a Concorde person.
He certainly was. The wonders of Facebook done this for me. A lot of people knock Facebook, but I thought it was wonderful. I put a little ad on there saying that anybody know Peter Baker, ex-Concorde test pilot, and within 20 minutes somebody came on and said, yeah, I knew him and I had that car as well.
That's absolutely amazing.
Amazing.
And who was that person?
That name of that guy is Bill, and he's here.
As if by magic, here is Bill Burridge.
Yeah.
The second owner of this magnificent car. So we're going to have a little chat with Bill about the car, and Bill is also a flight test engineer for the Concorde. So we'll be talking to him about some experiences on Concorde as well. So hi Bill.
Hi.
We're standing in front of a damask red MGBGT V8, which is a car that you were the second owner of.
I was.
And yes. Tell us a little bit about your ownership.
Well, originally it was in bracken with an autumn leaf interior, and this car was bought by Peter Baker, who was chief test pilot working for Brian Trubshaw on the Concorde flight test program, and he bought the car in around about July of 1974. And at the time I was working alongside those guys. In fact, Trubby was my boss, and I said to Peter one day, if you ever want to sell that car, get hold of me. And anyway, a few years passed by, and I moved from the flight test team at Fairford to British Airways at Heathrow, and then as an overseas engineer for British Airways. And lo and behold, in '81, Peter phoned me up and said, I want to sell the car. So I bought it.
So you bought it off Peter Baker?
I did.
Yeah. So he'd had it for a fair time at that point. I believe he bought it in '74, so up to '81.
Yeah, it was interesting because just after he bought it, he got a company car. And so obviously he was putting the miles on the company car.
Right.
He lived in St John's Wood in London, in a big old Victorian house that had been converted into 4 flats. And this car was parked next to the boiler in the garage that supported the 4 flats. So it was in beautiful condition.
So it's kept quite dry then.
Oh yeah.
There. Yeah.
And he only did, I bought it with 11,000 miles on it. So he only did about 11,000 miles in the car. I bought it in '81. Kept it until about 91, and I sold it with 55,000 miles on it.
So you did a fair few miles on that one then?
I did, and of course in those days I was flying with the Concorde a lot, so this aeroplane, Concorde, and this car have been side by side for many times. This car has probably been alongside more Concordes than most.
Which is something to think about, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
And we are standing at Brooklands in front of Concorde Delta Golf.
Yep.
I believe you have some experience with this actual aircraft.
I do. I was part of the flight test team that took it to Bahrain in, funnily enough, July, August of '74, where we did the hot trials for the aeroplane to prove that it could manage to operate in extremely high temperatures. So
So that was quite a good experience, I should think, with you on this. You've obviously flown other Concordes as a flight test engineer, or just as an overseas engineer?
I've flown on every British-built Concorde that was put together. I spent time on Sierra Tango, which was the prototype, down in that's now down in Yeovilton, and with Delta November, which was the pre-production aeroplane. I did the intake trials out in Tangiers in '74, and then I went on to fly with all the airliners, Alpha through to Alpha Foxtrot and Golf, as an overseas engineer with British Airways. And I took Alpha Foxtrot around the world in '87, and also took aeroplanes to the full extreme of the world, up to Rovaniemi in Finland, and down to Auckland in New Zealand.
So as commercial airliners?
As commercial airliners.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely. So going back to the hot trials, what does that actually entail?
Well, it's basically it's basically taking an aeroplane into a hostile environment in terms of temperature, and so you're operating the aeroplane off of hot runways, seeing how the engines perform, see how the aeroplane performs, and just taking it to the extremes of its temperature. At the other end of the scale, we took aeroplanes like 101, so Delta November, and that's the aeroplane that's at Duxford. We took that to across to Gander, and operated the aeroplane in really cold environments. And these aeroplanes were probably the most tested aeroplanes you could ever imagine. And so just about everything on them was tested to the extreme.
Absolutely, and I take it they passed out there. Were there many problems with them, or?
No, I mean, the purpose of testing an aeroplane is to try and identify it to fail.
Yeah, so you take it to the extreme.
Yeah, and if you can get it to fail, you find out what the fault is and put the fault right so that it's good for operational service.
Absolutely, yeah. And as you say, being an aircraft such as this, it was tested and tested and tested.
It was indeed.
Throughout its life, I would imagine. Well, certainly, for this one, never saw commercial use, this one in particular.
No, it didn't. It carried a lot of passengers in the run-up to the aeroplane getting its certificate of airworthiness, and in fact it was this aeroplane that was responsible for finally getting the certificate of airworthiness for the Concordes, for the British Concordes.
Right, okay.
Because effectively there were 3 generations of Concorde. There was the prototype, Sierra Tango down in Yeovilton. That was basically a proof of concept aeroplane. Could we get an aeroplane this big to operate that far? Once that was done, then Delta November, that's up at Duxford, that was used to carry out a lot of technical stuff. So developing intake laws for the intakes to make sure that they could manage the airflow into the engines at all sorts of speeds and heights and altitudes and things like that. And once all that technical work was done, this aeroplane was then effectively the airliner version which the others followed.
Absolutely. So in your capacity as an overseas engineer, I believe you went on some world tours with the vehicle, with Goodwood Travel, organised some special world tours that would have taken into airports that were not used to Concorde. Did that pose particular problems?
I think because of the work that we did on the test program, we tested everything, the way the aeroplane was going to operate in the terminal areas, how you refuel it. I mean, there's 13 fuel tanks on this aeroplane that need refueling, and it had to operate with standard equipment. So in essence, it was a little bit more complex than aeroplanes of the day, but it was just such great fun.
So if you needed spare parts or anything, you were in, I don't know, say Hong Kong or somewhere, or Australia.
Well,
was there difficulties in getting parts or anything?
We used to carry a flight spares pack on the aeroplane.
Right.
And then also...
A bit like you would in the MGB. But at grander scale.
Yeah. And we also had a very good set of technical publications that you could use, and there's inbuilt redundancy with this aeroplane. So if you couldn't fix it but you could fly it with something unserviceable, you would use the documentation as the means of certifying the release to service for the aeroplane to go flying. If you couldn't do that, you try and change the part, and if you couldn't do that, of course, I was with the world's favourite.
Yeah, so it wasn't too hard then. No. Great fun in those days, don't you think, though?
Absolutely, yeah.
You can imagine flying a supersonic aircraft like this around the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah. We took Alpha Fox, which is the aeroplane that's based down in Bristol. When I say it's located down in Bristol. We took that around the world, did something like 28,000 flying nautical miles in 32 flying hours. So
Right.
had some great fun.
That's a fair old bit.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent. So we've got a view here of Concorde nose and the MGBGT.
Yeah.
What's your favourite?
Ooh.
Are they just too different? They're too different.
They're
aren't they?
just too different.
Yeah.
It was always great fun getting off of this and getting
into that and driving away in that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the roar of the Concorde engine and the roar of the mighty 3.5 litre Rover V8 in there as
And
well.
as you've heard today, I mean, it sounds as good today as it did then.
It does.
And,
it does.
I think it's just it's probably sad in one way that they only built 2,500 of them.
Yeah,
or thereabouts.
it wasn't many, was it?
No.
Well, a few more than this.
yeah, indeed.
There we are. Great. Thanks then, Bill. Been very informative this morning, very interesting. And to reacquaint you with the MGBGT V8
Indeed.
as well.
It's been
We
a
haven't
pleasure.
seen that for a while.
No, it's been a pleasure.
Great. Thank you then, Bill.
Okay.
That's great.